Good morning. How are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Soup. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm joined by Chris Warren. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing good, James. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, so today I want to go through a high stakes hand that you found super interesting. This is from 400, 800, and played by our favorite Durrrr. So why don't you run us through the hand and we'll start looking at it from a strategic point of view and see what the hell is going on with these pocket jacks.
Absolutely. So I thought this one was really interesting because, and I think Durrrr kind of has this capability, but basically it kind of plays like a hand that you might play at 1-2 live. Or, I mean, like I know I've played this hand at 1-2 live. And it's interesting to see, obviously Tom Dwan, very talented player, navigating the situation. And I think even potentially making some mistakes and things that you can learn from. And yeah, it's just a really interesting hand. So to kick it off, we are playing for an 800. I'm not 100% sure if there were antes or not. I suspect not at this point. But, we'll have to leave a little bit of leeway for maybe that being different. So, Dwan's in the cutoff. He opens jacks. Nothing too crazy there. Schwimmer is the recreational player at the table. So this is very important to note. I think he's a MLB pitcher. And it's just very important to be aware of that. Kenny in the big blind is just bring Kenny. And so Schwimmer ends up calling and Kenny ends up calling and we go to the flop. So nothing too crazy here. So what are we expecting from pre-flop? So again, Schwimmer is sort of the known recreational player, trying to really put an exact range on what he would be doing here versus 3-betting. Like you just don't do that, I think, against a recreational player. In fact, it's almost best to kind of just presume they're somewhat balanced because based on the information you would have, I think, I don't know. Actually, I'm curious on your approach with this, James. I give them maybe like a looser range, but like something close to balanced. Is that how you kind of handle a button flat?
I mean, close to balanced maybe by accident, not necessarily on purpose, but yeah, I think there's going to be maybe a little bit of error, but yeah, it's probably going to be pretty nuttish heavy, and I'm not expecting a ton of 3-betting in general, unless they've shown themselves to be that kind of aggressive rec player. Otherwise, I'm expecting like a lot of the continuance hands pre-flop just get shunted right into the calling range, and I think just most rec players tend to do that. It's just easier, and I don't know. Maybe you can't blame them, but I think that's kind of what I generally assume.
Yeah. I mean, we just take our general stereotype of anyone who's not a professional leaning towards too loose. And like you said, again, also probably leaning away from 3-betting aggressively enough. I think the balance for me is not that I expect the player themselves to be balanced. It's that like, I can't know what their strategy is. So to analyze what I should be doing, I have to take into account like a wide range of possibilities. And maybe it's wider, but even still, I think actually using a balanced range gives you a good sense of where you should be. So that's kind of what I'm thinking out here. For Bryn Kenny in the big blind, I mean, he could just be calling a lot of hands here, standard. So there's nothing too interesting going on there. I wouldn't imagine most players are going to be looking to squeeze Dwan in this situation, especially with the recreational in the pot. So that is something to be aware of, that actually maybe Kenny might be 3-betting correctly less just because he would expect action from the very good player Dwan, but not as much action from the recreational on the button, maybe having a wide range of folding him out. So 3-bet doesn't seem super appealing because you're losing kind of the recreational value in the pot. And this is the type of thing I think you actually want to be very aware of if you're playing 1-2 live, strangely enough, is that, if you get in a battle with a regular and you create, 3-bet squeezes and 4-bets and things like that, that are maybe close calls, if you can default in a way that gets the recreational in the pot, you're actually increasing a lot of your theoretical value with the value of their mistakes post-flop. So this is something that I think a lot about and I think super important to be aware of. All right, so moving on. So on the flop comes 10-9-2. You got a flush draw. Kenny just checks sort of the default auto check. And then Dwan actually, I think, has a very interesting decision here. He ends up betting 5,500. And to me, immediately, this is super interesting. And I'll sort of outline the reasons why. Now, if we look at our hands, it's like we have jacks and it's a 3-way pot. But we have the overpair, right? Things are looking pretty great. It would appear. However, I think this is a situation that people tend to overvalue their hands or overvalue betting in general. Now, I think there is a good reason to bet here. And the main reason to bet here would be basically you have a recreational who has potentially a lot of hands that he would call with. And that's appealing to just put out some money and hope they call and, hope your other professional player just, doesn't come along, and then you're in a great situation when that happens. However, if you were to get raised, if, you get called, then there's a lot of sort of iffy turns that can come, right? This is not a this is not a hand strength that's going to be really durable against a lot of potential turns. We do have the backdoor. But when a queen, king, ace comes, et cetera, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable. So how do you kind of react when you're in this situation live?
This is just one of those where, like, if you know your opponents are really, really bad and really, really passive, and I think that's really like the key, is that you're not going to get raised here very often. And if anyone does raise here or later in the hand that is going to be like super, super face up and obvious, then I see more validity toward betting. But if your opponents are coming in with anywhere near like slightly correct continuance or applying a lot of pressure, this is not a spot where I'm looking forward to betting and getting raised at all. And even betting and getting continuance can be quite uncomfortable on future streets. So I think as a default, I'd check here, possibly consider check raising somewhere along the line, but I think check continue, check call is pretty typical. If it goes check, 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 I mean, turn's going to be pretty face up and easy to play out. I see betting here being a little dangerous, though, for sure, especially multi-way, especially on this texture. I personally prefer the check a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll just bring up GTO plus to kind of validate that. If we look at our GTO plus range, and this is just an analysis of your bet and check decision for those of you who aren't familiar. And what we're looking at is, the green represents all the hands that you should be checking here. And all the blue hands are the hands that you would bet for that 5,500 value. So it's pretty clear, right? Like you don't want to be betting a lot in this scenario. It's about 90-10. And, when we're doing simplifications, like we may just check 100% of the time and not really give up much in terms of like the expected value of a GTO equation here. And yeah, I think the defensively minded play is that you should be checking a lot. Now, there is also another option going back to the hand. This is a play that I like to integrate a lot into my live play and small stakes play, etc. You can also bet very small and use that as more of a default in a multi-way pot. And there's a huge amount of benefits, I think, to betting small in that, number one, if you're dealing with a situation where you have players who have wide holdings, by putting out any type of bet, like queen 7 of clubs may just outright fold. Queen 8 of clubs probably won't fold. But there's a lot of hands, people often will fold hands like ace jack offsuit in that type of scenario that have good equity against you. Maybe even ace queen, hands like pocket threes. We want calls from those, but like just having a range that bets small can be very, very powerful. And with this type of situation, even though this is 400, 800, we have a recreational in the pot. If I was really leaning exploitatively, I think I might probably look at that small bet, and I'm talking maybe 2,000, 25% pot, just as a way to kind of capture some extra equity and also avoid putting myself in the bad spot. Because if I get raised from a $2,000 bet, it's a very different scenario because, they kind of know my range should be wider and therefore they can attack it with a wider range of hands. And we're playing a real interesting pot at that point versus like what you said, like, man, you get raised on this large bet. You kind of have to continue, but you feel terrible about it.
That's exactly it. Is by making it seems so insignificant, right? I mean, we're talking about what, maybe a $3,000 difference in the cbet size here, but that can change the check raise size or the raise size if Schwimmer raises. It changes that fantastically, and then all of a sudden you have like a very different bloated situation. Like a raise here is going to be what, somewhere between 15 and 20 a good chunk of the time. If you go 2,000 or 2,300 or something like that and you get raised, it's maybe up to like 7 or 8k. And now all of a sudden we're not really getting toward commitment nearly as quickly. We have a lot more playability on turns and rivers. But if we get raised here for this size, I mean, this is just Sucktown. Again, like, I could see places in player types to do this against, even for this size, but I think in general, especially with the big blind, like, I don't know, I think you gotta be real careful with him specifically. He is very, very capable. I want to be very careful about getting check raised on this particular board. Because like you said, we kind of have to continue, and then we're in just an absolute shitstorm trying to figure out what to do on turns and rivers. Good luck.
And I think this is actually a really good example of why looking at Tom Dwan hands is just super fun. And I don't even necessarily want to say that his line is wrong, even though in my experience I would lean away from it. I just think that he's really kind of going out on a limb here, and it's funny because it doesn't look like it, but he's kind of, like, I'm imagining a scenario where, Schwimmer has like King 10 offsuit, right, which is a very plausible holding for like a recreational player. Now Dwan is getting a lot of value, and he's in a situation where the recreational player probably knows his reputation and has an inkling on his aggressive, play style. And he's not going to want to give that King 10 on a lot of boards. And, getting 2 large, maybe 3 streets of value with a good run out, it's very plausible. It's very plausible and very nice. And probably, I would assume that's kind of what Dwan's thinking. And
it's also nice because if they are a rec, and again, we're assuming passive rec more often than not, they're going to feel like they have to continue a 10x pretty inelastically, at least on flops and turns, if not rivers as well. Might even get really inelastic with 9x, and that's great. Draws the same, although it sucks that we block pretty much every single straight draw and some spade draws. There is that, and if they raise at any point, again, that should be very predictable, right? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it's like exclusively 2 pair plus, which puts you in a really, really nice situation. But if they fold and you catch that check raise from Kenny, which is, again, not going to be like the most infrequent thing in the entire world on this particular texture, in my opinion, I'm not sure that's the greatest spot in the world for you.
I was thinking about it. I suspect actually the larger sizing may be beneficial versus the Kenny check raise range, because if you go smaller, he can open up his check raise range more theoretically versus the larger size. I mean, just betting a larger size in general, Dwan in a 3-way pod, Dwan is saying he's going to have a fairly strong range of hands. And I think that actually could kind of cuff Kenny from really opening up a wider check raise range. Because it's like, if Dwan's saying he has, solid pairs and good draws, and then like occasional like gut shot trash that he'll throw away, it's not very appealing. I mean, just imagine being out of position against Dwan in that scenario. It's just not very appealing to have a big check raise range. You want to be pretty buttoned up, I would think. So, but by going smaller, all of a sudden you can maybe open the door to some extra creativity from Kenny. So,
as long as the 5,500 sizing is fairly well balanced. I think the issue here is I look at this, and I don't want to apply 2.5 and 5.10 logic to Durrrr necessarily, but I look at this and I say, okay, we have reg, fish in the middle. Well, this 5,500 looks a lot like overpair or something really strong trying to get max value from the fish. And if that's not properly balanced with the other holdings, and I'm not saying at all that Durrrr is unbalanced at all, but if it starts to shade that way, and now all of a sudden we're really, really capped off at like a lot of single pair hands, mostly over pairs, I mean, here's the check raise and then an all-you-can-eat buffet, and is Durrrr going to hold on? Maybe, but maybe not. So I think it's really important to look at that and say, okay, is Durrrr choosing a single size here or multi-sizing? And if multi-sizing, does this size lean one way or the other in terms of range strength? It's kind of the way that I would
interesting. Yeah, like you're saying that there's maybe a tendency to have the weaker end of his range with the larger size. I would imagine he's going to bet all his like pretty nutted hands here large as well. Like the ace king with the flush draw, the sets. I would have a hard
That's what
time
I'm saying.
imagining those.
What's he doing with like ace queen off? Like is ace queen off coming in here at 2,500 or 3K? In which case 5,500 is a very, very specific kind of range, or is it balanced across both sizes? Totally unclear, but this is just the way that I look at a spot like this and I try to break it down. And if I see other people in a game, most people at 1-2-2-5, 5-10, I mean, they're single sizing strategies all day long.
Yes.
But when we're talking about more competent opponents, I always at least leave the door open to, okay, how are they thinking about a multi-size strategy, if at all, and then try to deduce strength from that. But, now we're into the rabbit hole pretty quickly.
Oh, and thinking about like a multi-sizing strategy in a multi-way pot too, where,
Sure.
Even, we're talking about applying GTO here, but realistically, there is no direct GTO application of exactly what everyone should be doing just yet, at least. I don't think there's easily accessible software where we can figure that easily. So we're kind of like, with that, I'll bring that range up again. What we're looking at here is a heads up pot with the button range, and that's not what's happening, right? So to say exactly what's going on, it's hard to say. I know my personal preference here. I would probably be inclined towards a $2,000 bet. That would kind of be my final conclusion. What about you? What's your actual line moving to the turn here?
Yeah, I mean, it's either check or 2,300, and I think I probably take the check line and feel a little bit icky about it.
Yeah.
Again, like, you make the big blind any sort of passive, and I'm not really super concerned about a lot of check raises from that particular person, and all of a sudden I'm back to betting, I think, every day of the week. But again, it's still going to be in that 2 to 2.5K range, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is like a pretty good example too. You take 3 pretty good players. I'm not going to put us in the same category as Dwan, but
No.
all of us have a different opinion on how you would take this line, right?
Sure.
I mean, when you start getting to that level, right? Think about it. It's just pretty wild. And it just really depends on how you're going to build the rest of your strategy around that. And, I know for me, I really don't like, one of the reasons I like the 2000, I really don't like folding to the raise. I think that's pretty atrocious. And I really like being protected against the raise, because I don't feel like predicting a recreational player's tendencies in a raise pot. I don't like saying, okay, I'm just going to give them credit and fold. I don't like that. I certainly don't like it versus Kenny. And I don't want my Jack's hand here to be just like already in bluff catcher mode on the flop. And so I just I feel like it's a very defensive line. And also I do want to lean a little bit exploitatively and say, okay, like, I do think Schwimmer can check back a ton of hands. I would rather that he be betting. And by putting out the $2,000 bet, I protect myself. And that's kind of how I balance it out. But, like you said, you probably have a different balance. When you're checking, you're like even more protected, but then you're also including some check raises maybe. It really depends on the full strategy that we're bringing to the table. And that's why all options can be valid.
Correct. And then this is also kind of assuming, from what we just said in the last couple of minutes, that Durrrr is somehow betting jacks for 5.5K 100% of the time as is. That might easily not be true. This might be a 15% bet for him, and this just happens to be that percentage. So
exactly,
it's very difficult to discern straight up from a single hand history. But yeah, it's good to always be able to proof it, or at least look through what the solver is saying, and even though we're having to extrapolate from the solver, because the solver is just taking a heads-up spot rather than the multi-way spot, just because GTO Plus can't do multi-way yet. But yeah, it's fascinating to try to factor all that out. So let's continue on with the hand. So Durrrr bets 5,500, and we get the oh-so-fun raise from Schwimmer.
Yep.
Kenny decides to fold, and here's Durrrr. So what's kind of the thought process at this stage in the game?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like I kind of mentioned, that we are now in bluff catcher mode. It's very important to note that we have couple interesting blockers here. Jack's blocking both of, or lots of potential straight draws. And then also, the Jack of spades blocking, the main flush draw, or the front door flush draw. So yeah, it's, you don't feel good at this point, but in my opinion, you got a $28,000 pot, you're calling 10,000. Like, you don't feel good about your hand, but you have to call. It just seems required. I don't feel we can give a recreational player defined enough tendencies to just outright fold in the situation. I don't even think it's close.
Agreed. Bet folding here just seems absolutely horrific with Jack. So call and see how it develops, and just kind of be prepared to hate life every now and then. And by every now and then, I mean probably quite often.
So I am going to pull up the solver here. It's not exactly applicable because the solver is actually balancing, the overwhelming majority of our Jack's hands into checking. So we really can't take the solve from this point forward as valid, but it is interesting to kind of look, when we do go ahead and get a raise, we are in fact calling. You can kind of see the different display methods in GTO Plus. We are in fact calling 100%. all of our Jack's hands that ended up betting in this way at this point. So it's pretty valid, I would say, with balanced line. So
yep.
Move on from that. 4 clubs on the turn. Pretty wet, but not that significant, I would imagine, to the ranges, is my initial reaction when I see that card. And I don't think it'll massively change the balance of power between the ranges. How do you think about it?
Same way. Again, if Schwimmer was a different player, I might look at the 4 clubs a little bit differently in terms of, some of those backdoor combo draws now just opened up a little bit of extra equity because they'd be more inclined to take backdoor clubs or backdoor clubs plus gut shot, something like that, possibly for a raise on the flop. Mm-hmm. But against the rec, I mean, maybe you're talking like king, queen of clubs opened up some extra equity, or queen, jack of clubs. But overall, I'm not overly concerned with this. I think it's fairly brickish. And again, we're just kind of in like check and hope that it's not too big. That's kind of what I'm looking at here. What about you?
Yeah, it's the same for me. It's like we're in this terrible scenario that I'm very uncomfortable with, but it's now a fairly good turn in terms of our hand. Like, it's not an overcard. It's not the flush coming in. I'm not 100% sure if flushes are good or bad cards, but it's definitely not an overcard, and it's not a straight completing card.
Are, right? Yeah. I mean, if it's like the ace of spades, it's different than 3 of spades. Start blocking out some of those nut flush combos.
So yeah, I mean, it's pretty much an auto check, and kind of as would be expected, Schwimmer puts in a large bet as the recreational here. And my initial instinct in this scenario is just like, I mean, it's pretty much the same situation as the flop. This is a fairly good card for us. The bet is fairly large from the recreational player, which is, it's going to be a strong range, right? Like, it's going to be sets, 2 pairs, big draws. It's hard to think up too many like random bluffs. And we even block a lot of the draws. So it's like, it's uncomfortable, but I have a hard time imagining it's correct to fold here from a balance perspective. This is starting to be the point where I'd consider making an exploitative fold if I had reason to believe Schwimmer's, more of a diligent passive recreational. But at 400, 800, there's certainly a lot of recreationals who like to throw the money in too. So it's like getting very exploitative, like in folding. I think at 800 probably doesn't work. Now in a live 1-2 game, probably leaning on the fold button here, but
yeah, I mean, I kind of have a general theory of, if the game you're playing in is functionally televised, like Live at the Bike or High Stakes Poker in this situation, or anything on Poker Go like that, I'm kind of in the mindset of like, don't make any big hero folds. Just assume that there's always going to be a little bit more shade in someone's range than maybe there would be otherwise, which is why, if this hand is 1-2 or 2-5, like, yeah, you're kind of in hell, and then you might make an overly tight fold here because the way that they tend to not have enough shade in their range. But I'm never going to fault a call in this situation in this game. Like, I think you unfortunately have to. The issue, though, is once you call, it's give or take around 100 in the middle, about 150 back. I mean, I mean, welcome to hell. I mean, we knew this from the flop, right? I mean, this is just what happens when we get put into bluff catcher mode in a now bloated pot, because again, we're looking at that flop cbet size. Sometimes you're just going to have to really sink it and just hope the board works out for you a little bit, or that they make sizing mistakes somewhere along the way.
Yep. Yeah, I think I feel pretty much dead on with that. It's like we're heading down a disaster scenario, and I think it's really interesting to see a great player like Dwan in this situation, because I think we can all relate to being in this situation where we're like I'm behind, I'm bluff catching, I'm like kind of towards the bottom of my range, and a player who I don't really know how aggressive they would actually be is now betting large, and I feel obligated to call. And this is just such a common poker scenario. And what's really interesting is that, I'm sure Dwan has some very good logic for the line he takes, but the downside of those lines still happens and comes out for him, right? He called the flop raise, and I'll spoil it now, but he does in fact call this bet. And it's interesting to see very good players get in bad situations as well, and just how much of an impact that flop decision has on how you're going to have to play the hand. And I think it would be very exploitable to be folding over pairs here. Like, it just would be, even though we have, blockers on the logical bluffs, it's, and going, we'll pop over to our solver real quick. It's just like, we're checking the turn, and we're getting the bet. And, the solver says again, again, this is only a fraction of our combos, of our jacks combos here, but it says you have to call with 100% of them. And that is the balanced play. Like, unless you can just intuit that there's just not enough bluffs here, like, the balanced play, I think, is going to be to call here. And that is, in fact, what Dwan ends up doing.
Yep.
And even, like, this just felt like such a hand that I've just played so many times live. Of course, the ace comes on the river, and, Dwan again has an auto check basically in this situation. And this is a really interesting hit. It's a really interesting card because basically all the draws missed, and the scare card came. So now all of a sudden, like, Schwimmer had, a random overpair, or like king 10, or strange, maybe a less logical holding like that. Even things like 10-9 and two pairs are like, ooh, it's a scary over card. That's a scary card. And their potential value is down. So I look at this and I'm thinking, okay, the river betting scenario is going to be pretty polarizing. How do you kind of instinctually react to this one?
Similar. My only thing would be, like, in the range leading up to this, like, I don't personally put king 10 in here by this point. Mm-hmm. I think king 10 either doesn't raise the flop, or if it does raise the flop, and it doesn't bet so large on the turn. Mm-hmm. It's possible, but I think at some point something changes. So king 10 is not one of the hands that I'm throwing up in here. There could definitely be some ace-x of spades, but mm-hmm. shy of that, and probably not ace-10, honestly, for the same rationale. Maybe a little ace-10, but it naturally starts to block itself even further at this point. So, yeah, I'm kind of looking at this as, if he has one of the bluff combos, 7-8, one of the queen jacks, okay, that might take advantage of the ace, but other than that, yeah, I think it's probably going to be fairly strong side weighted, assuming that it's a normal size bet.
Well, I think what you even said it too is actually important. It's that pretty much every single pair hand is probably gone at this point. Unless it's just weird. Unless it's just,
like ace-5 of spades.
Well, I mean, I've seen people play king 10 like this for no reason, right?
Sure,
you always have to lead that. But any logical progression or like balanced GTO lines is like, there's no one pair hands in Schwimmer's holdings. It's like draws and two pair plus, pretty much. And yeah, maybe there's like ace-5 of clubs. Is that going to be betting for value on this river? Or ace-5 spades, probably more likely, but it's just,
I'd say no normally.
Yeah.
Until we see the exact size chosen in this hand.
Right.
Because that's the kicker. So
yeah, exactly.
Let's kick the size up.
Our general reaction to the river is that this is going to be very polarizing, and polarized situations tend to lean themselves towards larger bet sizes. But Schwimmer decides to use a $20,000 bet size here. And I remember reading the analysis of the hand. I think there was like some, he was like, well, I don't think that river is good for me. And then he bets 20,000. So important to note, there was some live information there, but this is, again, pretty miserable coming back to Durrrr.
I so want to smash it all in so hard. And I think part of it is the comment, because the comment plus the size, I mean, like it all lines up perfectly with like, I want to get thin value, but I really don't know what to do, and I'm uncomfortable, and here's Pentapot. And everything in my body just says, okay, would you ever fold ace-5 of spades? Because if you would fold ace-5 of spades, I really just want to like absolutely rip it in your mouth right here. And that being said, like, it's not like Durrrr like reps a tremendous amount by doing it. It's really just I read you as completely uncomfortable here. I want to apply maximum pressure and see if I can get this thing done. And just
Durrrr actually does have one very logical rep, which is ace-10.
Sure, right. But like, I don't see
even sets. I mean, the sets will call the raise, check call. I don't think that's
the hero call just doesn't beat anything. Because, like, I don't think the bluff, like, does Queen Jack bluff for 20?
Right.
Queen Jack probably bluffs for 30, 35, 50.
Well, I think exactly right. Like, the default on this river is if we're looking at, like, whose range is stronger here. Like, okay, so the ace helps Durrrr's ace-10 hands. I guess it can help a lot of Durrrr's draws. Yeah, the spade draws. Probably, yeah, I mean... Yeah, there's a good amount of spade draws, I guess. We'll have an ace here from Durrrr's side. Sure. And I think it tends to help Durrrr's range a bit more than Schwimmer's, whereas Schwimmer's, it's like, okay, he's got like 10-9, and then he's got draws and sets and whatever. Like, sets are fine, but there's not like hands that weren't already ahead or weren't already dominant that are being improved by the ace so much, except for, like you said, like maybe like ace-5 of spades or other ace of spades holdings. So it's and basically what that means is when you have a scenario where the river is favorable to the other person, what you want to do when you do bet, you by increasing your bet size, you're betting less. Right, because you to make a larger bet size, you have to have fewer value hands that you're trying to get value. Whereas if the bet size was smaller, you would have to have more hands that you're trying to get value from. So when you have this scenario, I think you want to bet big, because what you're doing is by betting big, you're increasing the number of bluffing hands, total quantity of bluffing hands that you can use in this situation. So if I have 7-8, if I have Queen Jack, if I have, it's not ideal, but like, you know, well, actually, definitely any of my club draws are pretty decent here, because I don't think we're too worried about Dwan having them. So, you know, it's very appealing to be able to bluff as many of your bluff combos as you can here. And a large bet size lets you do that. In addition, the rest of your hands are going to be hands like sets that want to bet. Like, does even 10-9 want to bet here with a large bet size? I would suspect probably not. Some, I would think, but not like maybe the majority. And, yeah, it's just one of those situations. I think you want to be betting large with that range. So when you bet small, there's something going on, and I'm super suspicious. So I like that instinct you have.
Yeah, it just looks a lot like I'm strong, I'm not nutted, I want to get thin value off you. Please, please, please don't raise. Like, don't get me wrong. I've done this exact stupid thing, trying to entice the raise. It's just that they're going to look at this and just want to mash it so hard.
Yeah,
I'm not convinced that the Rec here is thinking like that at all. I think Recs in general, when they talk and the action plus the talk actually kind of correlates and makes sense together, I think it tends to shade towards truth. Yep. So my only question from Durrrr's point of view is, I hate hero calling this. I mean, I can easily see talking myself into it. I mean, we're getting, what, 6-1 here. Like, you can't blame it. But by the same token, like, I am so inclined to ask the question of, if I mash it here, does 10-9 go away? You know, I don't suspect deuces or nines or anything like that ever goes away, but can I get 2 pair to possibly fold? Can I get ace 5 to fold of spades? And if yes, there aren't that many set combos. And while there aren't a ton of like 10-9 suited combos either, if you can throw ace 10, if you can throw a decent chunk of ace x of spades, yeah, it looks kind of pretty.
And I think
it's priced perfectly too.
Yeah, and I suspect that was immediately going through Dwan's head. I mean, it would have been the most logical thing. The downside to that line is we have one of the worst possible hands to bluff with. We have a hand that blocks spade draws, a hand that blocks all kinds of straight draws, and even like stuff like Jack 8 and things like that would be like overly loose calls on the button. It's just the worst hand to bluff with. Like, it really is. And it would just be us being like, I got this a line on this rec and like, I'm going to take him out. And I kind of, I guess I'll give the spoiler, like Durrrr ends up calling here. And I kind of agree with that. Like, I don't think it would be wise to check raise bluff this specific holding. I think it's just too rough. It's having those blockers working against you. It's like you said, everything about this scenario. It's an exploitative scenario. It's a I think incorrect bet sizing from Schwimmer on this river. It's just too obvious that you have like exactly 10-9, exactly ace 5. It doesn't seem like the type of sizing you would use with a bluff. It just seems like you just don't have a quantity of hands that would, because remember, again, when we go with that small size, we're saying we have lots of hands that want to get value like this. At a $20,000 bet size, lots of hands can get value, and we have lots of hands that can bluff like this. So essentially, we're just saying we're going to bet our entire range at 20,000, and I just don't think we want to do that, right? If I have a set of tens, if I have any set, I'm like ace on the river. Like, now I can get called by ace 10, I can get called by ace 9. Like, it just opened up the possibilities. I want to bet huge, and like, I'm thinking, well, I won't get called by queens or whatever, so like, why worry about that? Just go big and jam it, and then all my bluffs are going to want to be, I want to bluff as many possible bluff combos as well. So I just want to basically shove my entire range on this river, which may mean a hand like 10-9 becomes a check because it's just too thin.
Yep.
But yeah, it's I just think it's incorrect on his side.
It's never, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is it's never 20. Like, I can come up with like very, very specific assumptions from my opponent where I think betting 20 here on the button could make sense.
Yep.
But even still, in situations where it can make sense and it can be profitable, I still don't think it's best. Yep. Like, in probably like 95% of the scenarios. Like, you would need like such a specific assumption set to make this the best possible size available.
I think, honestly, in my situation here on this river, I think my range will be overweighted towards bluffs, because I think that's just how combinatorially how it works out. And I'm just going to shove with my entire range, because it's 150% pot. Again, I want my bluffs to pay out. I want them to be making the most possible here. All my sets are going to be jamming for value. No big deal. And like I'm actually making an exploitative play. I think by jamming, I think I would just jam pretty much anything, but like maybe some of the bad spade draw combos. Like, if I have queen jack of spades, that's a disaster to jam. King jack of spades, things like that. But like pretty much any combo of draws that feels like kind of reasonable to jam, I want to jam. I want to jam as many things as I can here.
Yeah, when you're thinking about that, I think it's important to like specify why you're saying that in terms of the Broadway combos that you think are kind of a disaster. Look, when I'm thinking about why, say, like queen jack of spades is kind of a disaster in that situation, is because it blocks out all of those hands that your opponent could be folding.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Okay, so just to clarify that.
And showdown value.
Why is that?
and
Sure.
showdown value, right? You know,
Yeah.
they have 7 8 of spades, queen jack wins.
Exactly. Yep.
King, you know, the king X combos even more so. So,
Yep.
you want to, yeah, when you're looking at this type of situation and you're in Schwimmer's position here on the button, you're trying to find some bluffs to use. You want to pick as many hands that don't have any showdown value. So like best possible holding. Now it's not necessarily the most frequent holding on the river is 7 8 without the spades, because we're expecting that, like, you know, Dwan would probably fold even like a lot of his like backdoor club draws and things like that, except for maybe like specifically king jack, king queen of clubs and things like that. And you know, the 7 8 is really going to lose to like a lot of Dwan's draws that got here to the river like this. So jamming has extra value. Whereas if we do have like the king queen of spades or something like that, it's like we'll just, you know,
Beats queen jack.
it gets a lot of. It's not like you're expecting to win when you check that at showdown after raising the flop and betting the turn, but there's certainly scenarios where it's going to happen. So, yeah, we want to pick the best of our possible bluffs and probably trim the worst possible bluffs. But even still, here, like I just want to be jamming a lot, and yeah. So,
yep, I can be on board with that.
And I guess we'll just show results. But Dwan did end up calling. And, you know, honestly, versus this bet size and with the blockers we have, I just don't think you can say it's wrong. It sucks.
Yeah.
And
it really does. I mean, the issue really is that we're getting 6-1.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just like, damn it.
Can a recreational just take a little chip shot with his draws here?
Make a mistake with a few of their combos. You know, maybe they do actually,
randomly have a 10.
Again, exactly. It's just that the size is just so damn face up that it makes me lean towards like this is never ever something my jacks beats. But maybe occasionally, like you said, the wind gets them the right way, and all of a sudden they decide to bet queen 10. They just have a total brain fart, or 8-9. They don't know what the hell to do.
Yeah.
But man, overall, like I'm looking at this, and this is just suck central having to check call that river with jacks.
Yeah, and what was really interesting, just again, it's not a valid solver solution, but I'm just going to pull it up anyways. So we check, and they bet the 20,000 on the river. Even the solver was saying actually it's a majority fold in this scenario. So it's interesting because jacks is actually kind of close to the bottom of our range once we get to the river. But even then, you know, like the solver is saying there's calls in there. So it's like, you just have to, you're really estimating, can I win about 16-17% of the time? And against a recreational, my answer is just like, show me the cards. I'm not inclined to make big folds against a recreational player is my default read.
Exactly. I have to be really spot on with they're never ever going to make a mistake betting the 20K.
Yeah.
But even still, like, raising is still kind of a sexy option.
I think in the moment, James would definitely check jammed this river.
Oh, it absolutely triggers that part of my brain. It's just like, but I could. I could. I think one of the other interesting things, and like you said, in the solver is, you know, this is not a perfect solve by any stretch of the imagination. So take it with the grain of salt it's meant to be. But if you back up one tick to the option on the river where Durrrr checks and Schwimmer's looking at Schwimmer's range, what should he be doing with their 10-9 suited? I mean, 100% check behind, even at the 20K size. So I think it's really important to say, like, solver's not really loving this by any stretch of the imagination, and you need to be like very, very confident that this is going to accomplish the right stuff. And I think in general, solver is not really in agreement with it. I think you and I agree that 20K is just the wrong way to approach that river bet. But I think it's always interesting if you're going to pull up the solver, look at both players and see if both of them are in accordance or not necessarily quite so much.
Yeah. Yeah. The solver absolutely checks this river, even at that $20,000 bet size. It does say 10-9 is a check. So, I will say I could see myself making this $20,000 bet size.
With what rationale? And again, like I'm
just pure exploitative. I think you're in the spot that you're in with a pair that you won't want to fold. And it's just such a tough scenario to work out of. So it's like, and even against a very good player, maybe more so against a good player who kind of knows like, oh, I'm really giving away a lot of showdown value against a small bet size. And what I'm trying to think if I would be bet calling. I probably would be bet calling against a good player with 10-9. But
that's one of the things, right? I mean, if you do this against a good player, it's bet, okay, pretty much going to have to call the shove. Yep. If you're doing it against like the passive person who is never ever going to call the pot size or bigger on the river, then you're kind of in a situation where, okay, you might bet fold. Yeah. But
which is you want to be really sure.
Really sure. But like over betting or potting here is just so damn attractive. Mm-hmm. Like especially if you're looking at Dwan or whoever the opponent is in this situation, like they are definitely pinned off at like one pair a ton of the time. Be it jacks, queens, kings, ace x of spades, 10x that they don't want to fold. Like I love putting people in that pressure cooker. Mm-hmm. That exact one where it's like, all right, figure out what to do with one pair for 1.5x. And, you know, occasionally they did improve with ace 10, but a lot of the time I think people make massive, massive mistakes against it. And It's not too difficult to find enough bluffs to make all that work out.
Yep. Agreed. And we'll just show the results. And I think this is a nice result for the for a 1-2 player to see, if you think about it, because it's like Schwimmer did have the 10-9, and you know, like Durrrr just got fished by the like most standard hand, most standard line, and you know, it's just a good reminder that even like extremely talented poker players get exploited or get, you know, it's not necessarily exploited. They lose in these scenarios, right? You know, and Dwan decided to take a line on the flop that was weak to this. And when the scenario happened, he got hit by it really hard. And like, so it's just, I think it's good to see as a, you know, 1-2 player that like, you've probably been in this situation, and then you call in the river, you see the 10-9, you're like, Jesus, like he had exactly what he should have. And you feel dumb, but that's also part of poker. And, you know, like really putting the thought into the flop and the type of scenarios that you're willing to handle and be ready for. That's the biggest decision here. You know, pretty much after that, it's like, you know, yeah, in a 1-2 game, you can probably fold the turn, but even still, you don't feel great about calling the flop and all that jazz. So it's, yeah.
100%. And there's a part of me that just wants to go a step further. And like, if you're thinking about how this spot looks for someone in a 1-2 game and you've run into this exact scenario before, like, you also have to understand that Durrrr kind of got let off the hook to an extent too. Because if that river was not the ace of hearts, if it was the 6 of hearts or a plethora of other cards, he's not facing a 20k bet on the river.
Yep.
And he's also probably not going to fold all that often either. So this is actually one of those scenarios where like everything was escalating to a monster river bet, except when it's something goofy like this and Schwimmer makes a goofy bet accordingly. More often than not, I think that's going to cost Durrrr another 50, 60 on the river. To have it only cost 20, I mean, I read the write-up as well, and it said that Durrrr smiled massively when he faced only 20.
That sounds like, yeah. That's funny. That's funny that was his reaction. Oh, okay. 20 is what I can do.
Okay, good. That wasn't a 75k difficult decision. It was 20. Fine, here's 20.
Oh, that's really funny. So, yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Indeed. Yeah, let us know. Hit the like and sub button if you want more of these in the future. And let us know if you want us to see review hands that you guys are playing or review more high-stakes poker hands. Combination of all. Just let us know what you want to see more of in the future. As always, thanks for hanging out today. See you with another video shortly. And in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.